Alright, this is a quick video on finding a confidence interval for a proportion. The formula for the margin of error is 1.96 times the square root of p times 1 minus p all over n. Now, I'll go through what that means. The e is the margin of error. The n is the sample size. Now that, for example, would be the number of people in a survey, if it was based on a survey. The p there is a proportion. Now, when we don't know what proportion is, we use 0.5 because that's going to make the biggest possible error, which is what we want to know. But if we do know the proportion, if we're wanting to take for a specific result, then we use the proportion that we know. So this is the formula that we use. Now, it looks fairly complicated, but once we get into it, it's not nearly so bad. Okay, so here's an example. I did a survey, just asked 500 of my nearest friends what their favourite fruit was, and we got these results here. So the first thing we want to know out of this is what's the total, because that's going to give us our n. Right, so we have our total, and we add them up, and our total comes out to 500. And that's really useful because that tells us what our n is. Right, and so knowing what our n is means that we have our proportion and we have our n, which means we can work out our error. So let's say how many people actually like bananas as their favourite fruit. Right? So bananas is 30%, right, out of the 500 people. So what we could do is we could say, well, what does that mean in terms of the population? What's the margin of error for that? So we first of all look at our margin of error. All right? So we know E is equal to 1.96 times the square root of p times 1 minus p, all divided by n. Right, so what that means is that here our proportion is 0.3. So our E equals 1.96 times the square root of 0.3 times 1 minus p is 0.7. all divided out by n, which is 500. Right, so some quick calculations. Make sure you put the brackets into the calculator when you enter this in. Should come out to 0.0402. That's 4 sig fig. All right. Now let's look at what that actually means. That means that we can be confident, 95% confident, that the actual population, the actual proportion of the population that likes bananas will be within 4.02% of 30%. So in other words, the minimum it could be is 30 minus that. So the minimum would be 30 minus 0.0402. And so the lower number of our confidence interval is going to be 25.98%. And the upper number of our confidence interval is going to be 30 plus 0.402, or sorry, not 30, but 30%, so 0.3, which is going to be 34.02%. That means that we can be reasonably confident that the total number of the total proportion of people in our population that like bananas are somewhere between 25.98% and 34.02%.